Hello, thank you for having me. First time for me opening basically a conference in a separate room. I apologize in advance if I talk a little bit fast because I have a lot of stuff to cover. And I feel like I just want to provide the most value I can. Usually I give a longer version of this talk, which is like 45 minutes-ish, 30 to 45 minutes. So I really tone it down and try to make the best out of it. So last year at the very first ever Local First conference, Chad Fowler emceed the event. I don't know if anybody knows this person. He is the author of The Passionate Programmer and kind of a giant and pioneer in the Ruby community. And back then, he said something that kind of stuck with me ever since, which was simply by being here, you're all pioneers. That was the first ever Local First conference. The second one was like a month ago, not even, like 3 weeks. I was here in Berlin to visit the second Local First conf. And what I found interesting about this, even though it's been over a year now, is that he is experienced in this kind of seeing a monumental shift like on the web, because he experienced the Ruby movement and how like everybody went on Rails back then. And yeah, that's why I kind of want to elaborate on Local First a little bit. Has anybody here who has, like a quick show of hands, who has heard this term before in general? 2 people? Okay, so who would say they have built something of this nature? Okay, perfect. So then this is a great first overview, I think, for everybody. My second question would have been, a third question would have been, who would say that they have a preferred way of doing so? And the fourth would have been, great, let's chat later. But we can still chat later about anything regarding this. So basically, Local First movement, or let's say the Local First paradigm, is just essentially a paper. It started as a paper in 2019, which was written by a few people at a lab called Ink and Switch. And it is basically like a set of rules that propose a lot of value to the end user. And I would like quickly to just touch upon these rules. So the first one is like fast, no spinners, which basically means that you should ever see a spinner. Nothing should ever load because the data is local. You don't really wait for servers, and you have optimistic UIs, basically instant feedback. Second rule would be it's multi-device. So users, it works across devices. So users can basically access it anywhere, either in their own household or separately. The data is stored also locally for the end user and synced for continuity and backup. So imagine we're all in the same Wi-Fi. It should never touch any server, and we should share the same data, ideally across some other technology. It doesn't have to be through a server and then back to you because we're in the same room. That's what brings me to the next one. The network is optional, so it works offline. The data syncs automatically when online again, and Local First apps handle offline better than cloud-based apps. 4 is seamless collaboration, basically enabling real-time edits. So technically, we should be able to pull in the same rectangle in a graphics-based thing like in Figma, and it should never break. It should always converge in a logical sense, and we should have no data loss. It should be able to resolve conflicts as they arise, and I will get into this a little bit later. This one is very big. It's longevity. I don't have any time to touch upon this at all today because I could talk about all of these topics on their own for a while. But this is basically that the data is accessible long-term. So independent of companies, when somebody goes bankrupt or they decide to sell, your data survives. Not only does it survive, you can just migrate it on your own to some other place and just own it because you actually own the data. And there's also no data loss of when a service ends. Privacy and security. So the data is stored on devices, ensuring privacy. It's not stored in the cloud, ideally, or it's at least end-to-end encrypted, or both. And it often limits servers. So often the server limits access to data, and in this case, this shouldn't be the case. Ownership is kind of the 7th thing, basically user control over data handling and prioritization. It's way too much to cover for 20 minutes, so I will kind of focus on these 4 things because I feel like this is where the most value lies for engineers and also end users, at least in the beginning. And these were kind of the initial principles and values of lo-fi software. When I say lo-fi, I mean, of course, Local First. Kind of since 2019, it rebranded a little bit and became more of a philosophical approach. taking inspiration from things like distributed systems, because Leslie Lamport famously wrote, a distributed system is one in which the failure of a computer you didn't even know existed can render your own computer unusable. And that's kind of why local first is so important, because Martin Klapman, who is one of the initial essay writers, or actually inventors of local first, he said last year at Local First Conf that the availability of another computer should never prevent you from working. So imagine you're on a train, you're taking a train from A to B, you go into a tunnel, Wi-Fi is spotty or just gone, and you lose your data that you just worked on for an hour. Ideally, that should never happen because it's stored locally, and when it pushes to the server, at some point it converges in a way that it just makes sense. I'll get into that in a little bit. This has also been said last year. We don't know yet what works and what doesn't work. Standardization process in a few years when we know what works. This year at Local First Conf, I really like this this bit. Local First for me is a value, and that value is empowering users. It's not a binary thing. It's really about to what degree are we empowering users. And this is from a session that was live on stage. It's called The Big Questions of Local First. And I can highly recommend this piece if you haven't seen it or haven't been at the conference. It kind of touches upon many of the philosophical aspects of local first. But what do we think about when we think about local first? So especially because not many people raise their hands in the beginning. So what I think about, what I think many people of you think about is sort of like this, like apps like Linear, Notion, Figma, basically like your instant apps that basically just are real time, and they always somehow converge to a state that makes sense. So even if we work on the same issue in Linear, that should work. And kind of Dropbox is like the OG, I would say, in this industry, like local first, because it is truly local first, because it is, you have your thing. But of course, it isn't in the end, because you don't own your data. It touches upon all these things that I said at the beginning, where it doesn't really cover the true values of local first. So these apps, I would say, except for Obsidian, because it's not open source. I don't know if you know these apps. I think some of you might. XColorDraw is basically like a TL draw, like a drawing tool for architectural diagrams or anything. And this tool is technically completely local first because it's end-to-end encrypted, it works offline. All the things that I said in the beginning, you can see the source code online. You can host it yourself, all these things. And AnyType, which is basically like a Notion, but just a little bit better, sort of, because it's also completely your own thing. You do what you want with it. Every piece of code they've written is public, and everything is end-to-end encrypted, and you can host it yourself. And if they ever decide to just stop existing, it will exist the same way for you because it's not a cloud thing. If you want to really learn about how to build these tools, I would suggest to maybe take a look at AnyType, because there, I don't know how many it is, 100 repositories are just very, very insightful. I'll sum it up a little bit. So it's software, set of principles and values, prefers keeping your data local. It's occasionally online to sync, fetch and back up. It's kind of the bleeding edge, even though, I mean, the term exists only for like 5 years, basically. And even people who work in this field, they go like, I find it confusing, and I'm in the middle of it. Because James Pierce, he is one of the authors of one of the biggest frameworks, which is TinyBase. It's just a state thing. I don't want to get too much into it. It's an amazing tool, but even he says like, oh, I'm really confused because like it's kind of a sprawl of different startups, approaches, technologies, topologies, etc. So it is very like fast moving. But at the same time, it's kind of like a gradual evolving movement. And I really, really liked this quote from this year's Local First Conf, which was last year. So talking about since the last conference, which was the first ever. Last year was more about the why we do this, and this year it's more about like the how we do it. We're in the middle of a paradigm shift, and it's less about like the user interface, but it's more of a conceptual interface. Like how do interfaces in general feel? They should feel instant. They should feel snappy. You shouldn't have to wait for things. You should own it. You should be able to just work wherever you want, offline or online. And ideally, these things should not. Thank you. These things should not break when you don't have internet access. To me, it's also, I mean, to many people in this field, it's kind of the logical evolution of state transfer, because if you look at how state developed over the years, kind of local first is kind of where you want to go, because technically it means whatever the database is at this millisecond is what you see on the screen. And ideally across all devices. So when something changes in the DB, it changes in the user interface, ideally in a 0 millisecond kind of way. This is where sync engines come into play. I'll get into that in a second. Again, sorry for the pace. I only have 20 minutes, including Q&A. So this brings me kind of to sync engines. This is a particular technology. It is not like a thing of local first, because in this talk that I covered in the beginning, where it's the big questions of local first, this is just a technology. It's not a value. It's not a thing. But I feel like this is where you as engineers and especially the end user gets a lot of value from. And I really like this tweet from Johannes, who's really, really, really like super active in this field. He says, most people interested in local first are probably best off with the sync engine. Building an app that's fully local first according to the 7 ideals that I mentioned in the beginning is a lot more work. And then Peter von Hardenberg, who's part of the people who wrote the paper, said, I think as the category matures, it's becoming clear that there are lots of great use cases for apps built around sync engines, and that we still have more work to do in order to make local first software easier to build. You could, like Linear did, roll your own sync engine. That's kind of why I think they had such a big boom in the industry, because I think this is the first thing they did. Like Thomas, he said that it was the first piece of code he ever wrote for Linear was a sync engine. To be fair, he has 20 years of experience in sync engines, so he has a little bit of an advantage. But I think this is where the kind of the competitive edge comes from, because they approach it in this way. Just a quick show of hands. Anybody using Linear or knows Linear? Okay, I'm going to describe it as Jira and good. That's how I like to pitch it. It's instant and very, very, very great. Maybe check it out. Not in any way affiliated with them. That's just the front end. This is the back end. So you could roll your own thing, or as I like to say, or Marshall McLuhan, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. So what I would recommend to you is to take a look at the more and more like upcoming. There's so many now. Like a year ago, I felt like we didn't have that many. Now we have so many sync engines. And if you're not sure what they do, how they act, some are based on CRDTs, some are based on server reconciliation. There's so many big words in this space of how these tools work. I'm so happy to finally have a resource to point you to, which is the Local First Landscape. It's also an initiative by Johannes Schickling. It is basically a super, super huge TLDR of all the tools kind of that use this word local first somewhere in their product. And you can, this is a huge like table. It goes down forever. And you can basically compare any detail that you want and how it is beneficial. So you can basically evaluate what to use and how to use it. And what I like about this tool is it's local first, and you can share the view with your colleagues. So technically you could go, oh, what do you think about this setup that we could maybe run? And then you click the tools together, you share a link, and they can evaluate it because it is basically seeing what you see on the screen. This brings me to kind of the next thing you will hear a lot, which is CRDTs. Anybody knows what this means? Awesome. So it stands for conflict replicated data types. And this is a thing you hear a lot in the space. Basically, it is like version control for your data types. That's how you can think of it. And it can't have any merge conflicts. So it is technically, it's an algorithm, nothing else. And it has different implementation approaches. But imagine we're like pulling on the same rectangle in a graphics app, or we're editing the same document, and the algorithm in the end can converge to a state that will always be sort of logical. So it's a non-conflicting data type, is how you can think of it. And basically a merge, as I said, that can never have conflicts. It can merge concurrent changes, ensuring consistent state. And it's basically like a general purpose data structure designed for multi-user environments. And by design, it is fundamentally local and private. So this is a very brief analogy. Going back to Git, thank you. Going back to Git, it's the same as giving every developer a copy of the repository and allowing each developer to make changes locally. At the end of the day, every developer in an organization can merge changes with every other developer, however they like. Unlike Git, I'm going to skip, unlike Git, a CRDT wouldn't hit merge conflicts and can merge out-of-order changes. That's why it's so beneficial to local first, because you don't know when somebody's offline, what happens if the data is just different, and this could technically take care of it. Just an illustration of how it would work. Not going to go into algorithms. These are kind of like the, I don't know anybody, like if anybody knows YJS, it's been around forever. It's like the OG in the space, the second one. This is like the OG, that's like the jQuery of CRDTs, is like YJS. It's very, very, been around for 20 years almost, I think, or 15. Automerge is from Ink and Switch, and these are just different implementations of a CRDT that you could use to make real-time, non-conflicting things. Again, this is all part of the local first landscape. You could, for example, in the third row here, take a closer look at what Automerge does or how it works. The last thing I want to touch upon is just local databases, because when you have a sync engine in place, you technically always have like a local database and the real database, and some algorithm that syncs from the right place to the other place, etc., and always pulling in the right data. Ideally, the right amount of data you need to not have, for example, 2 terabytes of data or gigabytes of data in the local database, because it would probably blow it up. Some of these, like SQLite, PGLite, and then some implementations around the native stuff, like DEXI or RxDB. And then you have complete also, basically, let's call it OSs or environments. Like Jazz, for example, is it does everything, and it works on a completely its own thing. It's called, I'm drawing a blank, co-values, yeah, for like collaborative values. So basically in Jazz, everything is collaborative. Every native thing is collaborative. So the whole system around this framework works basically according to the values that I said in the beginning. Temperature warning, interesting. So yeah, sync engines and local databases, they go hand in hand, because most of the sync engines have, like, they use a local database to put data in there. And again, here, feel free to consult the landscape for more information. All right, I never have gone through these slides so fast in my life. Of course, there's way more to cover that I'm not going to touch upon. I don't even touch upon this in the long version of this talk, let alone the short one, because this doesn't cover privacy, security. What about how do you version these things? Like, we have different things. How do you do auth, et cetera, et cetera? So there's way more. There's even way more questions. Like, yeah, just going to leave you up to that. And yeah, if you want like a really great resource, in my opinion, the official Local First podcast is amazing. It exists in both video and audio form. And yeah, basically every episode it goes into detail about some of the things that I touched upon. So yeah, long-term goal where Local First will hopefully take us. A very exciting technology and methodology for me personally is basically going from what we just had to this is what we have now, I would say. And ideally, this is sort of the end goal of Local First, I would say. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
We actually have a minute, right?
Or 3 or more. Let's have a few questions to our last speaker.
I know it was fast. I'm sorry about that.
Maybe I would...
Just historically...
maybe take this because I think they are recording.
Just historically, there was talk a lot of years ago about offline first. Is that what's the relation? It seems very similar. So just can you put that on?
I'm going to quote Aaron Budman on this, I hope. So if you think about like concentric circles, and if you think about basically the core and then the circles around it, you can think of local first being the most inner circle. And then you have around it another one, which is offline first. And around that, you would have like synced apps, technically. But offline first, or offline is a part of local first. This is like, it's not, offline first is like a piece of it. But this one touches upon way many more things, basically. It's a little bit broader and more philosophical. And it also has way more value, in my opinion. Because offline first technically is like, does the static website work when I don't have Wi-Fi? That's technically already offline first. But this one is, what if it's a collaborative real-time thing? In my opinion, that also should never have conflicts. So when you go back online. And yeah, when you think about like circles, this would be the most inner circle, and then offline first around it. But it entails that, yes.
Any other questions?
And also, they're not conflicting or no, my bad. They're also not conflicting technologies or something. They're basically, one is part of the other. Yeah.
I had one question maybe for you. Are there systems or applications online that can, web applications that cannot be applied, that cannot use local first paradigm?
Could you sorry?
Are there some applications that people would develop that cannot be that cannot use this paradigm?
I see. Oh, I understand. Sorry.
Yeah.
You wouldn't probably do this for things like social media related stuff, banking, stuff like that. You wouldn't use it for that, but you would use it for your. I'm going to just use some examples. Your Notions, your anything workspace related, like where you have like a workspace with data. This works really well with, like, for example, Linear or also, again, Notion. Figma is also kind of a thing, but this has this whole graphics aspect in place. But I wouldn't use it for, like, social media-related things. Or I had a slide on this. I could look it up. There's two more things that I'm drawing a blank on right now. But this would be something ideally, it would just be way too much work. But Johannes, at the moment, he's building a local first music app. So basically, you can think of all your music in one place, and like Spotify, like everything, even SoundCloud, etc. And this also uses online things. And he's built a whole ecosystem around this app that he's building. So I think if you have enough time, anything's possible. But I would probably start a little bit smaller in that regard, as an enhancement for what you're building.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker again.